The easiest person to replace is usually the one quietly holding everything together. The conference room fell completely silent as the chairman adjusted his glasses and smiled toward the young man standing proudly beside him. Effective immediately, he announced, my son, Brandon Whitmore, will become the new director of operations. A few polite hands began to clap, though the applause sounded uncertain, as if many people were waiting for someone else to decide how they should feel. At the far end of the polished walnut table, Nathan Carter slowly closed the leather notebook he had carried to every meeting for nearly 15 years. His expression never changed. He simply nodded once before looking toward the young executive who had just inherited the position Nathan had spent more than a decade quietly building. Brandon offered a confident smile filled with ambition. I appreciate the opportunity, he said. I plan to modernize everything. Nathan rose calmly from his chair. I sincerely hope you succeed, he replied. There was no bitterness in his voice, only genuine kindness that somehow made the room even quieter. Emily Harrison, the company's chief financial officer, watched Nathan carefully. She had worked beside him for nearly 8 years and had never once heard him complain about overtime, difficult deadlines, or impossible client requests. Whenever problems appeared, Nathan somehow solved them before most executives even realized they existed. Yet he almost never spoke during meetings unless someone asked for facts. While others competed for recognition, Nathan quietly returned to work. The chairman extended his hand across the table. Nathan, thank you for your years of service. Human Resources has prepared a generous separation package. Nathan accepted the handshake respectfully. Thank you, sir. He gathered his notebook, a family photograph, and a coffee mug decorated with colorful hand-painted flowers that his 10-year-old daughter Lily had made at school several years earlier. Nothing else on the large office desk truly belonged to him. As he stepped into the hallway, employees quietly looked up from their computers. Several wanted to say something, but no one seemed to know the right words. Nathan smiled warmly at each person he passed. Take care of yourselves, he said gently, and take care of one another. One young supervisor hurried toward him. Mr. Carter, should we keep using the weekly coordination schedule you created? Nathan paused for only a moment before answering. Follow the direction of your new leadership. But what if? Nathan softly shook his head. Support them the same way you supported me. The young supervisor nodded slowly, though uncertainty remained in his eyes. 40 minutes later, Nathan parked his aging pickup truck outside the small white house, where Lily was already waiting on the front porch with her backpack resting beside her favorite blue bicycle. The moment she saw her father, she smiled and waved excitedly. Nathan smiled back just as warmly as he always did. You are home early, Lily observed after climbing into the passenger seat. I am, Nathan answered. She studied his face for several seconds before asking quietly, did something happen? Nathan looked through the windshield toward the peaceful neighborhood before replying. Today someone else was given my job. Lily frowned with innocent concern. Are you sad? Nathan thought carefully before answering. No, why not? He reached over and gently squeezed her hand. Because a job can belong to someone else tomorrow. He smiled softly. But your character always belongs to you. Lily leaned her head against the truck's seat and smiled, accepting the answer with the uncomplicated trust only a child could offer. As father and daughter drove home beneath the warm afternoon sun, neither of them noticed that inside the company's headquarters, dozens of small decisions were already beginning to change, tiny adjustments that looked harmless on spreadsheets and meeting agendas, yet together would quietly become the first invisible cracks beneath a business that had depended far more on one humble man than anyone had ever understood. Nathan Carter woke every morning at 5:30 without needing an alarm. Years of responsibility had trained both his mind and his heart to rise before the sun. The quiet little house echoed with familiar sounds as coffee brewed in the kitchen and bacon sizzled gently in an old cast-iron skillet while Lily finished packing her school bag at the dining table. Morning light filtered through the curtains, painting warm golden lines across family photographs that filled the walls, each one preserving simple moments rather than expensive vacations or grand celebrations. Nathan believed ordinary days deserved remembering because they eventually became the memories people treasured most. Lily looked up from her homework folder. "Daddy, are you going to look for another job today?" Nathan placed a plate of pancakes in front of her before sitting down with his own cup of coffee. "I will," he answered with a calm smile. "But first I promised someone I would help fix a problem." Lily tilted her head curiously. "Who?" Nathan chuckled softly. Mrs. Henderson's bakery oven stopped working again. Lily laughed because she already knew the answer before asking the question. Her father rarely turned away anyone who needed help, whether they could afford to pay or not. After dropping Lily off at school, Nathan drove across town in his aging pickup truck. The small bakery smelled of fresh bread, cinnamon, and warm butter long before he stepped through the front door. Mrs. Henderson greeted him with obvious relief. "I told you I would pay this time," she insisted. Nathan smiled warmly while opening his toolbox. "Let us make sure your customers have fresh bread first." Less than 40 minutes later, the old commercial oven hummed steadily once again. Nathan quietly tightened the final panel before wiping his hands with a clean cloth. Mrs. Henderson placed a paper bag filled with warm pastries into his hands anyway. "You always leave my shop better than you found it," she said gratefully. Nathan simply thanked her and headed home. Meanwhile, inside Whitmore Manufacturing, Brandon settled comfortably into the spacious operations office that had once belonged to Nathan. The polished desk looked impressive beneath the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the production campus, but the stacks of neatly organized binders left behind seemed unnecessary to him. He opened the top drawer and found dozens of handwritten notebooks carefully labeled by month and department. Brandon frowned. "Why would anyone still keep paper notes?" he muttered. An assistant standing nearby answered carefully. "Mr. Carter updated those every day." Brandon smiled confidently. "Everything is digital now." Without opening a single notebook, he instructed the records department to move the binders into storage so the office would look cleaner. Across the hallway, Emily Harrison noticed several employees quietly exchanging uncertain glances. She stepped into the operations office just as staff members carried the last box toward the archive room. "Brandon," she asked politely, "have you reviewed those notebooks?" He leaned back comfortably in his chair. "There is no need. The software tracks everything." Emily looked toward the closing elevator doors carrying 15 years of handwritten observations. Something about the moment unsettled her, though she could not explain why. She had watched Nathan write inside those notebooks almost every evening after everyone else had gone home. He never treated them like personal journals. He treated them like living maps that connected people, suppliers, production schedules, customer expectations, and countless details too small for most executives to notice. Yet she also understood that every new leader deserved the opportunity to lead in his own way. She quietly returned to her office without saying another word. Late that afternoon, Nathan picked Lily up from school, and together they stopped at a neighborhood grocery store before walking home beneath rows of maple trees beginning to glow with autumn colors. Lily smiled as she carried a loaf of fresh bread from Mrs. Henderson's bakery. "You fixed another oven today, did not you?" Nathan laughed gently. "How did you know?" She held up the warm paper bag with a proud grin. "Because kindness always seems to come home with us." Nathan looked at his daughter with quiet gratitude, unaware that back inside the company he had left behind, the first invisible threads holding hundreds of daily decisions together had already begun slipping apart, one overlooked detail at a time. 3 days passed, and at first glance everything inside Whitmore Manufacturing appeared to be running smoothly. Production lines remained active, delivery trucks continued leaving the loading docks, and the executive reports arriving on the chairman's desk still showed encouraging numbers. Brandon Whitmore walked confidently through the operations floor each morning, shaking hands, introducing new efficiency initiatives, and assuring department managers that the company was entering a more modern era. "We are simplifying unnecessary procedures," he announced during one staff meeting. "We should trust technology instead of outdated habits." Several managers nodded politely, though their expressions revealed more caution than enthusiasm. Emily Harrison quietly observed the room from the back, without interrupting. She noticed that many experienced supervisors glanced toward the empty chair where Nathan had always sat, not because he spoke often, but because he usually noticed problems before anyone else recognized they existed. Later that afternoon, Brandon reviewed a digital scheduling dashboard displaying every production order in bright colors and neatly organized charts. Everything looked perfectly balanced. "See," he said confidently to his assistant. "The system handles everything automatically." His assistant hesitated before replying. Mr. Carter usually reviewed those schedules manually every afternoon. Brandon smiled dismissively. If software needs someone checking it every day, then it is not very good software. The assistant quietly lowered his eyes and returned to work. Across the production floor, however, tiny inconsistencies had already begun appearing. A supplier delivered specialized components exactly on time, but no one noticed that a routine adjustment Nathan had always coordinated personally had never been entered into the digital planning system. One assembly team completed its work ahead of schedule, while another waited several hours for materials that should have arrived first. None of the delays looked serious by themselves. They resembled ordinary inconveniences experienced by every manufacturing company. Yet Nathan had spent years quietly preventing dozens of small problems from colliding on the same day. Now those invisible connections were beginning to loosen. Emily received the first customer service report just before lunch. A long-term client had called to ask why a shipment confirmation contained conflicting delivery dates. The mistake was corrected within minutes, but Emily found herself studying the report longer than necessary. Nathan had always insisted that small inconsistencies deserved immediate attention because they often revealed larger patterns hiding beneath the surface. She walked downstairs to the logistics office where experienced coordinator Melissa Grant sat reviewing transportation schedules with an uneasy expression. "Anything unusual?" Emily asked. Melissa looked up slowly. "Nothing major." She paused before continuing. "Just different." Emily pulled up a chair. "Different how?" Melissa pointed towards several shipping screens. Mr. Carter never relied on only one schedule. He always compared warehouse inventory, driver availability, customer priorities, weather forecasts, supplier updates, and production progress before approving final shipments. Emily looked at the computer monitors. Every report appeared accurate. "Can the software not do that?" Melissa offered a respectful smile. "The software shows information." She gently tapped the side of her desk. Mr. Carter understood relationships. Those words stayed with Emily long after she returned to her office. Meanwhile, Nathan spent the afternoon helping Lily build a small model bridge for her science class using wooden craft sticks, glue, and simple engineering drawings spread across the kitchen table. Lily carefully placed each support beam exactly where her father suggested. "Do tiny pieces really matter this much?" she asked. Nathan smiled while adjusting one small brace no wider than his finger. "The strongest bridge usually depends on the parts people never notice." Lily nodded thoughtfully as the glue dried beneath the warm kitchen light. At almost that same moment, hundreds of employees inside Whitmore Manufacturing continued following schedules that still looked perfectly organized on their computer screens, unaware that the unseen connections quietly holding the entire operation together were beginning to weaken one unnoticed decision at a time. And no spreadsheet had yet learned how to measure the value of the man who had spent 15 years protecting those invisible foundations. By the beginning of the second week, the first signs of real strain could no longer be dismissed as ordinary growing pains. The morning operations meeting started 15 minutes late because 3 department managers arrived carrying different production schedules that no longer matched. Brandon Whitmore stood confidently at the front of the conference room, clicking through colorful presentation slides filled with performance charts and efficiency projections. "These are temporary adjustments," he assured everyone. "Every organization experiences small disruptions during leadership transitions." His words sounded reassuring, yet the expressions around the table remained unusually quiet. Emily Harrison studied the latest financial dashboard resting in front of her. Inventory costs had climbed only slightly. Overtime hours had increased by a modest percentage, and customer satisfaction scores had slipped by less than 1 point. Individually, none of the numbers appeared alarming. Together, however, they formed a pattern she had never seen before. After the meeting ended, Melissa Grant quietly approached Emily in the hallway carrying 2 folders. "May I show you something?" Emily nodded. Inside the first folder were shipping schedules generated automatically by the company's software. Inside the second were handwritten notes Nathan had prepared during the same week 1 year earlier. Emily compared them carefully. The computer schedules were accurate, organized, and efficient. Nathan's notes contained something entirely different. Beside customer names, he had written reminders such as family-owned business. Always unload after 10 in the morning because the owner attends school drop-off first. Another note read, delay shipment 1 day if the forecast predicts mountain snow. Driver safety comes first. A third simply said, call before shipping because they close early every Thursday for community volunteer work. Emily slowly looked up. None of this exists inside the software. Melissa shook her head gently. Because none of it came from data. She smiled faintly. It came from relationships. At almost the same moment, a long-standing customer called the sales department asking why a delivery had arrived exactly on schedule but with the wrong production sequence, forcing their assembly team to sit idle while waiting for one missing component. Nothing had technically been shipped late. Nothing had violated company policy. Yet someone who understood the customer's daily operation would never have approved the order in that sequence. Brandon dismissed the complaint as an isolated misunderstanding and instructed the customer service team to apologize and issue a shipping credit. The problem disappeared from the weekly report, but it did not disappear from the customer's memory. Across town, Nathan spent the afternoon helping Lily prepare for her school science presentation. Together, they spread construction paper, colored pencils, and small wooden blocks across the kitchen table as Lily practiced explaining how every support beam inside a bridge shared weight with the others. She pointed proudly at the tiny model they had built together. "If I remove just this one piece," she said, gently lifting a small support from beneath the bridge, "it still stands for a moment." Nathan smiled encouragingly. And then, Lily watched as the structure slowly leaned before settling unevenly onto the table. "The rest of the bridge has to carry more than it was designed to hold." Nathan nodded quietly. "That is how many systems work." Lily looked thoughtfully at the little bridge before asking, "Can people be support beams too?" Nathan rested a gentle hand on her shoulder. "The best ones usually are." Hundreds of employees inside Whitmore Manufacturing were discovering that truth without realizing it. Every department continued working hard. Every employee remained committed, and every computer system functioned exactly as designed. Yet the invisible connections that had quietly balanced people, priorities, timing, and trust for 15 years were no longer there. And for the first time, Emily began wondering whether the company had not merely replaced an executive, but unknowingly removed the steady foundation that had allowed everyone else to succeed. The second Friday after Nathan left the company began with an unusual tension that no one could disguise anymore. The reception desk answered twice as many customer calls before 9 o'clock as it normally handled in an entire morning. Department managers moved quickly through the hallways carrying reports instead of coffee cups, and the production floor that usually operated with quiet confidence now echoed with hurried conversations and uncertain questions. Emily Harrison stood in front of the large operations dashboard, watching performance indicators change one by one. Inventory accuracy had slipped again. Premium freight expenses had nearly doubled. Customer complaints, though still polite, were arriving more frequently from clients who had trusted the company for years. None of the problems were catastrophic by themselves. Together, they painted a picture that Emily could no longer ignore. She returned to the operations office and requested access to archived records that had been moved into storage after Nathan's departure. Several employees wheeled in the familiar boxes filled with his handwritten notebooks. Brandon looked up from his computer with obvious confusion. "Why are we bringing those back?" Emily answered calmly. "Because I want to understand how he managed the operation before we decide what should change next." Brandon folded his arms. The company depended too much on one person. That was the real problem. Emily opened the first notebook without arguing. Every page contained carefully organized observations rather than personal opinions. Besides supplier names, Nathan had written seasonal reminders, alternate transportation options, maintenance schedules, customer preferences, weather considerations, staffing adjustments, and countless handwritten arrows connecting departments that officially reported to different managers but quietly depended on one another every day. Emily slowly turned another page, then another. The notebooks were not replacing company systems. They explained how those systems worked together in real life. She suddenly realized Nathan had never managed operations through authority alone. He had spent 15 years building trust between people who often never met each other. Warehouse supervisors trusted production planners. Drivers trusted dispatch coordinators. Customer service representatives trusted purchasing managers. None of those relationships appeared anywhere inside software reports, yet every successful day had quietly depended on them. Melissa Grant stepped into the office carrying another binder recovered from storage. "There is something else you should see." Emily opened it carefully. Inside were handwritten summaries from weekly meetings Nathan had held every Friday afternoon. Every entry ended with exactly the same question written across the bottom of the page. Who might need help next week before they ask for it? Emily remained silent for several moments. That single sentence explained more about Nathan's leadership than any organizational chart ever could. He had not spent his career reacting to problems. He had quietly prevented them. At almost the same time, Nathan stood inside the community center, helping volunteers organize donated furniture for several local families moving into permanent housing. Lily carefully attached small handwritten labels to every box while smiling at children who eagerly carried books and blankets toward waiting parents. "Daddy," she asked as they finished arranging another table, "why do you always help people before they ask?" Nathan gently straightened one crooked chair before answering. "Because everyone carries something heavy that other people cannot always see." Lily nodded thoughtfully and wrote the sentence into the little notebook she had started keeping after watching her father for so many years. Back at Whitmore Manufacturing, Emily closed the final notebook and slowly looked across the operations office where expensive software, modern displays, and detailed reports continued filling every screen. For the first time, she understood that the company had never depended on one extraordinary system. It had depended on one ordinary man who quietly connected hundreds of ordinary people with uncommon care. And as that realization settled over her, she also understood why every attempt to replace his position had failed to replace the invisible architecture of trust he had patiently built one relationship at a time. The beginning of the third week brought something the company had not experienced in years. Silence replaced confidence. The executive conference room, once filled with optimistic forecasts and routine discussions, now carried the heavy atmosphere of unanswered questions. Large digital screens displayed shipment delays, rising operational costs, and customer satisfaction scores that continued drifting downward day after day. No single failure explained the decline. Instead, dozens of small problems had quietly joined together until they could no longer be separated. Brandon Whitmore sat at the head of the conference table, studying the reports with growing frustration. "Why is every department waiting on someone else?" he asked. No one answered immediately. Finally, Melissa Grant spoke with careful honesty. "Because they no longer know who is connecting the decisions." Brandon frowned. "The procedures should connect them." Emily Harrison slowly closed another one of Nathan's handwritten notebooks before looking across the room. "Procedures organize work," she said quietly. "People organize trust." The chairman remained unusually silent throughout the meeting. For the first time since appointing his son, he asked very few questions because the reports already spoke for themselves. A major customer had postponed renewing a long-term agreement until delivery performance stabilized. Supplier relationships built over many years had become noticeably strained. Department managers who once solved problems with a single telephone call now waited hours for approvals because no one fully understood how one decision affected every other department. Emily returned to her office carrying 3 of Nathan's notebooks and spread them across the conference table. She began tracing one delayed shipment backward through purchasing, production, inventory, transportation, customer scheduling, and field service. Every trail eventually pointed toward one conclusion. Nathan had quietly reviewed each connection every single day before approving final decisions. Not because company policy required it, but because experience had taught him where small misunderstandings eventually became expensive mistakes. Emily whispered almost to herself, "He was never managing departments." She paused while turning another page filled with handwritten arrows connecting names instead of job titles. He was managing relationships. At that same hour, Nathan and Lily were spending Saturday morning at the local library where volunteers hosted a children's engineering workshop. Nathan patiently showed several students how simple wooden gears transferred movement from one wheel to another. One little boy looked at the finished model and asked, "Which gear is the most important?" Nathan gently rotated the largest gear before pointing toward a much smaller one hidden near the center. "Everyone notices the biggest gear," he said with a warm smile. "But sometimes the smallest one keeps the whole system moving." Lily smiled because she understood her father's answer reached far beyond the wooden model sitting on the table. Back inside Whitmore Manufacturing, Emily requested historical performance reports covering the previous 5 years. She removed Nathan's name from every chart and compared production stability against his daily operational notes. The pattern became impossible to ignore. Whenever unexpected weather delayed transportation, Nathan had quietly adjusted supplier deliveries before shortages appeared. Whenever a customer's production schedule changed, he had coordinated warehouse priorities before confusion reached the loading docks. Whenever one department struggled, another department somehow seemed ready to help before anyone formally requested assistance. None of those decisions existed inside automated systems. They existed inside the judgment of one man who had never asked for recognition. Emily leaned back slowly and looked through the office window toward the busy factory below. The company had believed it replaced an operations director. In reality, it had removed the living bridge connecting hundreds of people who trusted one another because Nathan had first chosen to trust them. And as that truth settled quietly into her heart, Emily realized the company was not collapsing because someone lacked authority, experience, or intelligence, but because the invisible foundation built through 15 years of humility, consistency, and quiet service had disappeared the moment its most dependable guardian walked out the front door. Exactly 3 weeks after Nathan Carter quietly walked out of the company carrying nothing more than a notebook, a family photograph, and a hand-painted coffee mug, the executive boardroom looked nothing like it had on the day of his departure. The polished table remained the same. The leather chairs remained the same. The large windows still overlooked the sprawling manufacturing campus. Yet the confidence that once filled the room had disappeared completely. Every executive now stared at reports that refused to improve no matter how many meetings they held. The chairman slowly removed his reading glasses and looked toward Emily Harrison. "Tell me the truth," he said quietly. "What are we missing?" Emily placed Nathan's worn notebooks on the center of the conference table instead of another financial report. "We are not missing a process," she answered calmly. "We are missing the person who quietly connected every process." Brandon shifted uneasily in his chair. Surely one employee cannot matter that much. Emily gently opened one notebook to a page filled with names instead of numbers. "These are warehouse supervisors." She turned another page. "These are supplier managers." Another page followed. "These are customer contacts." Then another. "These are production coordinators." She looked around the silent room. Nathan knew every one of them personally. He knew who preferred early deliveries because they coached Little League after work. He knew which supplier never missed a promise if given one extra day of notice. He knew which customer always accepted alternative shipments during harvest season because their storage yard was full. She slowly closed the notebook. None of that knowledge existed inside our software. No one spoke. The chairman finally looked toward Brandon. His voice carried disappointment rather than anger. "We believed we promoted a title." He lowered his eyes. "We never understood the responsibility that title represented." At that same moment, Nathan was sitting beside Lily on the front porch of their little white house, helping her sand the edges of a wooden birdhouse they had spent the weekend building together. The late afternoon breeze carried the scent of fresh-cut grass through the neighborhood while birds gathered quietly in nearby maple trees. Lily brushed away fine wood dust before smiling proudly at their nearly finished project. "It looks stronger now," she said. Nathan nodded. "Because we took time to prepare the foundation before decorating the outside." Before Lily could answer, an unfamiliar black sedan slowly stopped in front of the house. Emily Harrison stepped out first, followed several seconds later by the chairman himself. Neither wore expensive business jackets. Both carried only quiet expressions and sincere humility. Nathan stood to greet them with the same warmth he had shown every visitor throughout his life. "Good afternoon," he said kindly. Emily offered a respectful smile. "Good afternoon, Nathan." The chairman hesitated before extending his hand. "May we speak with you for a few minutes?" Nathan looked toward Lily. "Would you mind bringing us some lemonade?" Lily smiled and hurried inside, leaving the adults alone on the peaceful front porch. The chairman remained standing for a moment before speaking. "Nathan," he said softly, 3 weeks ago, I believed our company could replace your position." He paused as though choosing every word carefully. "Today I understand that we replaced a chair, but never replaced the man who quietly carried the weight behind it." Nathan listened without interruption. There was no satisfaction in his expression, no trace of resentment, only the calm attention he had always given people willing to speak honestly. Emily placed one familiar notebook onto the porch table. "We finally understand what you spent 15 years building," she said gently. Nathan rested one hand on the weathered wooden cover before looking toward the company leaders who had once believed his quiet service could easily be forgotten. And in the peaceful silence that followed, both visitors realized they had not come to convince a former employee to return to work, but to ask a man of uncommon character whether he would be willing to help them rebuild the trust they had so carelessly allowed to slip away. The chairman remained quietly seated on Nathan's front porch while the evening sunlight settled gently across the quiet neighborhood. Lily returned carrying 3 tall glasses of homemade lemonade on a small wooden tray before smiling politely at the unexpected visitors. "I hope you like fresh lemons," she said warmly. Emily accepted her glass with genuine gratitude. "Thank you, Lily." The little girl nodded before returning to her birdhouse, leaving the adults surrounded by the peaceful sounds of rustling maple leaves and distant children laughing as they rode bicycles down the street. For several moments no one spoke. Nathan believed important conversations deserved unhurried silence before important words. Finally, the chairman looked directly at him. "Nathan, I owe you an apology." Nathan listened quietly. I confused familiarity with replaceability. I believe that because you never demanded attention, your contribution must have been ordinary. He lowered his eyes. I was wrong. Nathan answered with the same calm voice that had guided countless difficult conversations throughout his career. We all make decisions with the understanding we have at the time. Emily gently placed one of Nathan's worn notebooks onto the porch table between them. Your understanding protected an entire company, she said softly. Ours did not. Nathan rested one hand on the notebook, but did not open it. How are your people? He asked. Emily looked surprised. She had expected him to ask about financial losses, customer contracts, or executive decisions. Instead, he asked about people. They are exhausted, she admitted honestly. Everyone is working harder than ever, but they no longer know how their work connects with everyone else's. Nathan nodded slowly as though he already understood. When people stop seeing one another, they eventually stop understanding one another. The chairman leaned forward. Nathan, we would like you to return as director of operations. Nathan smiled kindly before shaking his head. Thank you for the confidence, but I cannot accept that position. Both visitors looked disappointed. Emily quietly asked, May we ask why? Nathan glanced toward Lily as she carefully painted the roof of her wooden birdhouse bright blue. For 3 weeks my daughter has eaten dinner with me every evening. He smiled warmly. I do not want to lose that gift. The chairman nodded with understanding. Then tell us what you would accept. Nathan remained silent for a moment before answering. I will help your company recover. Relief immediately appeared on both their faces, but only under one condition. Anything reasonable, the chairman replied. Nathan looked first at Emily and then at the chairman. Do not ask me to rebuild the old system. They listened carefully. Build a better one. Emily leaned forward with genuine curiosity. What do you mean? Nathan gently opened the notebook to its first page where one sentence had been written years earlier in careful handwriting. People succeed together long before companies do. He turned the notebook so they could both read it. Create leadership training based on service instead of family names. Teach every future manager to spend time on the production floor before entering the executive offices. Pair young leaders with experienced employees who understand the work. Reward cooperation as much as performance. Make relationships part of the system instead of leaving them to chance. The chairman slowly read the sentence again before quietly closing the notebook. No one spoke for several seconds because every recommendation sounded remarkably simple, yet none of them had been included in the company's strategy before. Emily finally smiled through grateful eyes. You are asking us to change the culture instead of the chart. Nathan nodded gently. Charts organize positions. He looked toward Lily, who proudly held up the finished birdhouse with bright blue paint still drying beneath the evening sun. Culture teaches people how to care for one another after the meeting ends. The chairman slowly stood and extended his hand once more, not as a superior offering employment, but as one humble man asking another to help restore something far more valuable than declining profits. And as Nathan accepted the handshake with quiet dignity, all three adults understood that the future of the company would not be shaped by the title anyone held, but by the character they chose to practice every single day. 1 year later, the atmosphere inside Whitmore Manufacturing felt completely different. The same production lines operated with renewed confidence. The same loading docks welcomed trucks from across the country, and the same office buildings overlooked the campus. Yet something far more important had changed. Conversations moved more freely between departments. Experienced employees mentored younger managers, and every executive spent part of each month working alongside warehouse teams, customer service representatives, production planners, and delivery coordinators before making major operational decisions. The company no longer measured leadership only by financial results. It measured leadership by the trust people earned every day. Nathan Carter never returned as director of operations. Instead, he accepted a new role as senior leadership advisor, visiting the company only a few days each month while continuing to place his greatest priority where it had always belonged, with Lily. Every evening they still shared dinner together, worked on school projects at the kitchen table, and took quiet walks through their neighborhood whenever the weather allowed. Nathan had regained something far more valuable than an executive office. He had reclaimed time that could never be replaced. Emily Harrison stood at the front of the company's newly established Leadership Development Center, welcoming a room filled with newly promoted supervisors beginning their first day of training. Mounted on the wall behind her was a simple statement that every participant would study before learning anything about budgets, production schedules, or management systems. Leadership begins by making the people around you stronger. Emily smiled as she looked across the room. You will learn software, she said calmly. You will learn finance. You will learn operations. But before any of that, you will learn how to earn trust. Among the first lessons was a familiar exercise. Every future manager spent 1 week working in departments they would never directly supervise, listening before leading, observing before changing, and asking experienced employees what invisible challenges they solved every day. The program quickly transformed the company's culture because people finally felt seen instead of merely managed. Even Brandon Whitmore changed. The difficult weeks following his promotion had humbled him more deeply than any executive seminar ever could. Rather than defending his early mistakes, he became one of the strongest supporters of the new leadership program, openly encouraging young managers to seek wisdom from experienced employees before making important decisions. One autumn afternoon, Nathan and Lily visited the company campus for the graduation ceremony of another leadership class. Employees filled the auditorium with quiet anticipation, while families smiled proudly from the audience. The chairman stepped onto the stage carrying a small wooden plaque instead of a corporate award. 1 year ago, he began, our company believed success depended on titles. Today we understand that success depends on character. He invited Nathan to join him. Nathan accepted with his usual humility, looking slightly uncomfortable with the attention. The chairman handed him the plaque. Engraved across its polished surface were simple words that reflected everything the company had learned. The strongest foundation is often the one nobody notices until it is gone. The audience rose together in a long-standing ovation. Nathan did not bow or celebrate. He simply looked toward Lily sitting beside Emily in the front row. Lily smiled with quiet pride, holding the same hand-painted coffee mug she had made years earlier, carefully preserved despite its tiny crack along the handle. Nathan smiled back because that little mug reminded him that the most meaningful things in life rarely appeared impressive to the world. They simply remained faithful through ordinary days until their true value became impossible to ignore. As the applause slowly faded and warm afternoon sunlight streamed through the auditorium windows, everyone present understood that the company had never been rescued by one remarkable decision. It had been restored by humility, strengthened by trust, and renewed because one quiet single father refused to measure success by the chair he occupied, choosing instead to leave behind something every generation after him could build upon with dignity, wisdom, compassion, and the enduring belief that people will always matter more than positions.